Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Rehoboth property owners face a steep tax hike. Affordable housing legislation is moving through Annapolis. We'll have an exclusive interview with the Maryland Housing Secretary, Jake Day. And have levees and dams made flooding worse for the nation's rivers? We'll talk with Tim Palmer about his new book, Seeking Higher Ground, the Natural Solution to Our Urgent Flooding Crisis. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. First, I want to turn to Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. And Susan, I want to begin with this property tax hike there in Rehoboth Beach. At least that's what they're looking at, perhaps a 29% increase. What's going on here?
Yes, all kinds of increases. Nobody likes to see cost increase, but the residents of Rehoboth Beach are facing not just one, but several hikes in costs. And increases they are, several of them. The Rehoboth Beach commissioners are proposing raising taxes and fees because funds are needed to make up for a $4 million budget deficit. The commissioners, with Mayor Stan Mills, passed a $38 million FY25 budget on February 15th, and the mayor called it quite challenging. Faced with that challenge, the commissioners came up with the idea to increase property taxes, you're right, Don, 29%, parking meters up from $3 an hour to $4 an hour, parking permits up 30%, rental taxes up from 6% to 7%, and wastewater meter fees up 28%. The property tax increase won't be official until and unless the commissioners agree on that when they meet in June. If it's approved, the property tax will jump from 6 cents per $100 of assessed property value up to 7.75 cents per $100 of assessed value. The budget was adopted on March 15th, and that budget assumes the property rate will be increased, but it won't be official until that June meeting, and that meeting will be on June 21st. I talked to Lynn Cohan. She handles public relations for the city of Rehoboth, and she said the mayor proposed increases, but these increases are so new, just recently announced, that questions and comments from property owners and business owners haven't really started coming in yet. And we also have to remember the busy tourist season hasn't started yet. So businesses that are open in the summer, those owners might be, as of yet, unaware of the plan to make these increases. Even so, Ms. Cohan said the commissioners raised the rental rate from 6 to 7% in April, and she and her public relations office only got one call from one unhappy resident and a couple questions. We're still getting the word out, she told me, and she added property rate increases tend to attract more attention, so residents will likely be more vocal and concerns and complaints might be coming in, but they just haven't started yet. If they do call City Hall, it's a good bet they'll be talking about a possible increase as well in mercantile license fees, and Ms. Cohan told me it isn't certain when that could happen. The town needs funding for a lot of upgrades, including a new beach patrol headquarters, restrooms, wastewater plant upgrades, to surface a portion of Rehoboth Avenue, for paving, to replace a water main, and salary increases for employees. And as we've talked about here in the past, Rehoboth Beach, like Ocean View, is facing a 27% increase in employee health insurance costs. The town has to pay salaries for several employees on the police force and a new dispatcher, plus a new city website. They also need a new street sweeper. So that's a lot of expenses, Don, and a lot of increases that certainly will not be popular. We'll keep you updated as the commissioners continue to meet and make these decisions.
We also, by the way, in Delaware, we have this handgun permit legislation that's apparently going to be passed and sent to the governor's office. What do we know about that? Is there a lot of pushback? I understand the Delaware State Sportsman Association said they were disappointed.
Yes, ways to regulate guns have been in the news for a long time now. Last week, on March 15th, the Delaware Senate passed a permit to purchase handgun bill, but only after considerable debate. Hours of debate that included strong words from Senate Majority Whip Elizabeth Lockman, who is a Democrat. She told her colleagues she is willing to work with them on legislation, but she made it clear the goal of many of her fellow lawmakers was not to make it stronger, the legislation stronger, but to continue to delay what she called an important life-saving law. Her words were very clear as she said, after 5 years of debate and 4 versions of the bill, that was twice included in Governor Carney's budget, and after 26 proposed amendments on just one version of the bill, I think the time has come to send this bill to the governor. The idea of the legislation is to cut down on straw purchases. That's when a second person agrees to buy a gun for somebody else, as well as, of course, stopping crimes and homicides. Those who sponsored the bill made some strong points by saying most of the guns used in crimes, and some people call them crime guns, are revolvers. 75% of them were purchased in Delaware. Senators on the Republican side have been working to make changes in the legislation, like not having delays in issuing permits and making sure that if somebody is denied a permit, he or she has plenty of time to appeal. The state Senate voted 15-6 to approve the permit to purchase bill. The bill will require individuals to receive a permit and also get safety training before they can buy a gun in Delaware. The bill won't take effect for 18 months. It now goes to Governor Carney for a signature, and he has said he'll sign it as soon as it crosses his desk.
And I expect, of course, I believe the association has said that as soon as it becomes law, they're going to challenge it.
You will see challenges like we have for the past several years. Yes, this is not over, and it will go back and forth for months to come.
Also, Cape Henlopen referendum set for March 26, first since 2018 to get some more money. What's going on with that, and where's that money going to go?
Tuesday, March 26th, the Cape Henlopen School District will have a referendum, and they want to decide if the school district should build its first pool and also spend about $1 million in cost associated with hiring 30 new teachers. For every teacher hired, there's a $30,000 to $40,000 cost, and that's what Superintendent Bob Fulton said, just with hiring new people, not doing anything with our current employees or raises or anything. We need this funding for these extra costs, he said. And you're right, this will be the first referendum for the school district in 6 years. The last one was in 2018. Superintendent Fulton said Cape Henlopen has been growing rapidly, and that has led to the district needing 30 new teachers. 30 new teachers have been hired each year for the past several years. Those teachers are needed because every year another 200 to 300 new students enroll. The district has 1,500 more students and 170 more staff members than it had in 2014. Fulton said an increase of 0.214 to the capital projects tax rate would allow the school district to purchase land and fund projects approved by the state. And that would mean an increase of about $153 per year for the average home in the district if the referendum is approved. The district could buy 103 acres of land to build that new district office and for bus maintenance, that indoor pool we talked about, and funding for staffing. Mr. Fulton said even with Cape Henlopen's rapid growth, the school district has not raised the operating tax in 6 years since that last referendum in 2018. So we'll see how that turns out on March 18th.
I also understand that they had wanted to have some additional funding that was something that was not certified by the state, I guess, for additional classrooms that would have funded, I guess, 60-40. They expect to go back, I guess, to the state legislature and try to get something again.
Yes, those classrooms are important because there's so many more kids, the population growth and the growth in that area is so intense. Not just with the schools, but with, as we've talked about, with the infrastructure and with the highways and the roads. So yes, they need additional classrooms and books and projectors and all the computers, laptops, iPads, all the things that kids need.
I didn't need those before.
No, I didn't have them either when I was growing up. We actually had pens and paper.
There you go. And finally, we got the new Millsboro Police Department building. They're cutting their ribbon next week. Long time coming.
I'm happy to say, and the Millsboro Police Chief Brian Calloway is even happier to say, that the town of Millsboro's new $7.8 million police station will open with a ribbon cutting and tours for the public on Wednesday. The public is invited to come and see the 13,000 square foot building on West Railroad Avenue in Millsboro at 10 o'clock on Wednesday, March 27th. I've been covering plans for this new police station for the past 5 years, as the town council has considered letting the police force move out of the overcrowded and outgrown building on Main Street and build a new town hall and a few other options, until Chief Calloway suggested a new structure on a once empty lot. And finally, everybody agreed on that. As the current building is turned over to the Public Works Department, the police force will move into the new one, probably in early April, and enjoy more space for exercise equipment, offices, cubicles, a training room that can be used by the public for meetings, and even a basketball court open to the public. That basketball court, the money for that basketball court, $80,000, was donated by Mount Air Farms. A regulation court with rubberized flooring, it will be very popular with the kids in Millsboro who always say they don't have anything to do. Chief Calloway said they'll probably even supply balls if the kids don't have their own basketballs. Chief Calloway has been logical and patient throughout this long process, and he's so happy that the building is finished. He told me, you only build a police department once every so many years, so you have to make sure you do it the right way. A lot of time and effort has gone into this, so we wanted to make sure it was done right. He's very excited about it, and he wants everybody to be there. Senator Carper is expected to be there to speak and help cut the ribbon, and there'll be a little ceremony, raising of the flag, which he said indicates they're in business. They're in service. They're ready to move in.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore has made affordable housing a major priority with a series of bills now moving through the General Assembly. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Governor said that Maryland has a housing shortage of around 96,000 units and warns that this might grow over the years. Jake Day is the Secretary of Housing and Community Development. We have him on the phone this afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Don, nice to be with you.
So let me first of all ask you, how serious is this? I mean, why is it that we have this kind of shortage, especially when it comes to affordable housing?
Well, when we frame this conversation in the context of a crisis, we're doing so because it's at an extraordinary level, and it's affecting every family in the state and, frankly, every family in this country. The supply shortage that we have is creating an affordability crisis that is just crushing the family budget, and it's also just changing the opportunities people have to either become a homeowner, to stay in their homes, to move into a house that's the right size for their family, to even consider renting. So it creates an incredibly tough situation. And this did not just begin. It was just exacerbated by the pandemic. It began really, truly in 2008 at the end of the financial crisis and the Great Recession that our country went through, which was a real estate-driven financial crisis. And not surprisingly, investment in housing production changed for a period of time. But the problem is we've never caught back up. So there is no correlation today with how many housing units we produce as a country and our population, nor what housing stock we need to replace that's in bad condition. So we simply just got out of the pattern of building enough housing as a nation.
Well, in terms, by the way, of that, I mean, there are other states, perhaps in Delaware, for instance, but certainly on Delmarva, where there is a lack of affordable housing. States are trying to deal with this. What makes us unique?
Maryland's unique in a number of ways. Number one, we again, for many years, particularly in boom years around the Washington metro area, places like Salisbury, Hagerstown, Annapolis, where we saw population growth, we weren't building enough housing, and so now we have an acute shortage. Maryland is also unique in that we make it really, really, really difficult for families that find themselves in financial hardship. We have the highest eviction filing rate in the country by far, and we have the lowest eviction filing fee in the country by far. And in the absence of things like the pandemic era emergency rental assistance program, which was an eviction prevention cash program, in the absence of those sorts of programs, which have all ended and dried up post-pandemic, we have really nowhere else to look but to fix the problems that existed prior to the pandemic. And so the governor has asked us not only to produce more housing, but to ensure that we're protecting the most vulnerable populations in our state as well.
Well, in terms of housing, I mean, the housing developments are driven certainly for the top first. That is to say, people are inclined to build developments for those people who are wealthy or who can afford them. We see a lot of that, particularly in the state of Delaware. And so there is this natural trend, I think, in the real estate industry, just in general, to build housing that is not necessarily affordable, leaving behind housing that might be more affordable as it ages and so on and so forth. I mean, what's the story with that dynamic?
That's exactly right. I mean, markets are imperfect, and where they fail, that's where it is the public's responsibility to step in and provide either incentive or subsidy or requirement. And in this case, with housing production, you are 100% right that the market will naturally produce more housing where that housing can produce a profit for the people who are building it. And where it won't, which is affordable housing, lower lower income units for families, or income restricted units for families of lower incomes. The market is not going to produce that. Subsidies required. Subsidies required today, and it's going to be required tomorrow. And we have great programs to do that. The federal low-income housing tax credit, Maryland bond financing. We even have for home ownership, we even have the Maryland mortgage program, which is $1 billion a year in mortgage underwriting that we do at DHCD, including down payment and closing cost assistance for first-time home buyers. So we have to recognize that while we need to produce more housing, the market will react where market incentives are created for market rate housing, but there are also going to be the requirement needed for us to incentivize the affordable units that our families desperately need. And oh, by the way, when we talk about those units, we're talking about 60% AMI units. We're talking about people that work for Wicomico County government and City of Salisbury government, our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, the public works employees. We're talking about, really people that have a good living and a good wage. This is for the people who live in our community. That 96,000 unit housing shortage that the governor references and that I've talked about is not for in-migration. These are not families that are somewhere else. These are families that are doubled up, tripled up, living in unsustainable conditions and unlivable conditions in our communities already.
Well, let me, by the way, just clarify before we get into the bill. So are you saying, in effect, that, say, for instance, if I'm an employee of Wicomico County, that might still wind up needing some kind of assistance that some of your legislation and some of your current programs are going to require? I mean, that seems odd to me.
That is absolutely what I'm saying. And it does seem odd. And the reason why it is odd to all of us is that housing costs have risen so much that they have become unaffordable for most families. So, families in, again, Wicomico County that have good jobs, predictable pay, that have, paychecks are showing up on time, 1st and 15th of the month, those very same folks are eligible. Many of them are eligible for income-restricted units and income-restricted vouchers, housing vouchers, and other federal and state programs because they make 60% of the area median income or below based on the size of their family. So, yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's a fact, and it is also a reminder that as we hear fear-mongering about this unidentified other that would come to our communities if we build housing that's affordable, we can easily disprove that and remind folks that it's the very people who we employ in our communities who are struggling to make ends meet and who qualify for affordable and attainable housing.
One other thing before we get to the bill, again, I think it was a Democratic poll research group. I said something like 80% of respondents said that they were concerned about affordable housing, that this was a major concern. Are you finding that as you go around the state?
Well, we're finding it everywhere, and clearly it is one of the number one concerns around the state. Multiple polls from Greater Washington and the Maryland Association of Realtors both reinforce that point in different ways in recent weeks. And one of the interesting takeaways is that a vast majority of voters are saying that they are fed up with local government and their inaction, and that they expect the state to step in and take action. And really interestingly, to the point, 50% of voters, half of voters, are saying that they would no longer vote for their delegate or senator in the Maryland General Assembly if they voted against things that would increase affordable housing production. That's a pretty telling statistic right there.
So let me turn to some of the legislation. What is this sort of Maryland Community Investment Corporation that's sort of aimed at low-income communities securing federal funding? How would that work? And I saw a figure of something like $50 million is what you're looking for in funding into state projects.
Yeah, so that is a facet of one of three of the governor's bills. The governor has three housing bills in this year, and they are oriented on the two major barriers to housing production, which we can classify as, number one, regulatory barriers, mostly local government barriers to housing production, and number two, financing, the funds that are available. And while we cannot influence the macroeconomic factors like interest rates, or in a grand scale like interest rates or inflation, or the price of plywood. There's a lot that we can do to draw dollars into housing investment in Maryland. And by the way, the third is the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act, which is focused on, in the meantime, recognizing that it's going to take time to build additional housing. And in the meantime, we've got to protect vulnerable renters who are subject to a turbulent rental market. So on the Maryland Community Investment Corporation, this is a CDE, a community development entity. States, counties, cities have stood these up. They're vehicles for new markets tax credits, which is a federal financing tool that gives tax incentives to investors who invest in low-income communities, development projects in low-income communities. That could include housing and even owner-occupied housing, can include community facilities. It can even include shopping centers. The last, it could, in other words, include anything, industrial facilities, you name it. The last one to be built in Wycomico County with new market tax credits was actually the North Point Plaza Shopping Center with Home Depot and Target. And so it can really be anything as long as it's in the right census tract. So this entity would help bring, per project, an average of $50 million into Maryland. And so we would expect, an award every other year or so, approximately. It takes a lot of legal work, a lot of accounting work to qualify for these credits, manage them, manage the development projects, partner with developers and nonprofit and community partners who are engaged. So it's not an easy prospect, but it's something that Comptroller Learman and I have been vocal proponents of and are excited to work together on.
Is this money that's already available in sense of credits and so on and so forth from the federal government, or do you need more legislation either at the federal level or something else involved?
No, this money is competitive every year, $5 billion a year. This money is spread across the country, awarded to projects. There is not a state allotment, so there's no limit to how much of that we can win in Maryland. So we're not creating an entity that will be in competition with other CDEs that practice in Maryland. In other words, we are in competition with America. So our bright ideas are going to be up against their bright ideas. Whether in Baltimore, whether in Salisbury, whether they're in Hebron, whether in Cambridge, you name it.
Now, the other element here is, of course, the Housing Expansion Affordability Act, which talks about density. Tell me a little bit about the thinking behind that in terms of affordable housing.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, there are regulatory barriers, mostly put in place at the local level to shape development. And it's not surprising. Those are authorities that reside in the state government that are allowed to be practiced by local government. We enable local government to put those zoning and planning restrictions in place, and certainly have the right to retract that authority. Maryland's got a strong history of doing that. We've done it time and time again when we tell jurisdictions where they cannot build housing and other things. And we do that through Maryland's legacy of smart growth. The septics bill was, a massive restriction and downzoning statewide. And what we're saying here is, what we've always failed to do is increase we failed to incentivize the production of housing in the right places, in the places where we do want it. So we never finished the sentence. In other words, we never finished the thought. So to be sort of intellectually honest, we're finishing the thought, and we're doing it in the context of, again, a crisis. So what this bill does is it incentivizes additional density for developers in targeted areas, 3 targeted areas: 1 around transit stops, rail transit stops, 2 on nonprofit-owned land, and 3 on former state-owned campuses. There's about 10 of those around the state. And in those 3 targeted locations, we would hope to produce more housing. And we incentivize, we also require that they incorporate affordability. And in the recently reprinted version of that, those affordability requirements came down. The House and then lastly, we recognize that we're going to need to come alongside those developments and subsidize and, actually be a partner to the affordability portion of many of those developments.
So, I mean, in terms of like, for instance, say if there's like, say, a rail station that's nearby, I think I saw 20% affordable housing units, or nonprofits, there might be 50. I mean, it sounds like there's a range that you're looking at.
Yeah. So let's say there is by right on a piece of property, a piece of residentially zoned, multifamily property. They can produce 100 housing units on that site. This would allow them by right to essentially an overlay zone. It respects the underlying intent of the zoning and adds a percentage, 30% above. So they could produce 130 housing units. Now, as amended, they would have to make 15 of those units into affordable housing units. So 15 of those would be restricted to 60% area median income. So the rent would be restricted in proportion to that. And it would essentially require that they incorporate affordability into their development.
Now, by the way, in terms of affordability, what kind of numbers are we talking about to make, say, a house or an apartment, or that matter, any development affordable, I suppose? What's the number range we're looking at?
Yeah, Don, we're always talking about, when we say affordable, we're always talking about 60% area median income. That's the requirement with the state. Now, they can do more deeply affordable housing than that. 30% or below. They could target, somewhere in between. That really depends on the finances of the developer and what they can produce. But it would have to be at least 60% AMI or below.
Now, the other thing, I know there's some opposition within, or the state legislature. One Baltimore County delegate said that this was sort of taking away local zoning authority. State Senator Jason Gallion said this was a state takeover housing authority from local jurisdictions. How do you see this offer, as it were, fitting into the local zoning concerns?
I would point Senator Gallion to the Maryland Constitution, and I would point out that these are the powers of the state government, and that they are delegated to our counties and municipalities with limitations and restrictions, and we can reserve those powers anytime the Maryland General Assembly sees fit. I suspect that he's trying to make a more nuanced point, which is that he thinks communities should have the final and only say over what can and cannot be built. But obviously, that's not how zoning law works either. We don't do that. We don't operate that in that way. We never have. State law is very clear about certain things that are restricted by zoning, and so we don't give free rein to local governments to just place restrictions or allow things willy-nilly. Again, I use the example of the septic spill, which restricted to 7 lots what could be built on a farm. It didn't matter if that farm is 700 acres. They used to be able to build 700 homes on that, and today, and in every county, in every corner of this state, you've got all ag zoning is restricted to producing seven lots, and in some cases much less. So I'd say we'd have to look at the Maryland Constitution as our guide there, and this bill follows that precedent, and also the precedent of all other smart growth law that has been adopted. It also, let's remember, this doesn't strip communities of their powers. It adds a power. This is an enabling bill that gives additional power to build more, to do more, to grow their economy, to add housing. The NIMBYs won't view it that way. The people who are opposed to additional housing are those who benefit most from a restriction on housing, which is existing legacy landlords who inherited their properties. Those are the folks that are really up in arms because they don't want anybody to ever build additional housing in their communities. And I think that's really what this comes down to. But 99% of us aren't landlords. 99% of us didn't inherit a bunch of homes from our parents. 99% of us are struggling right now to either pay our mortgage, have a house that fits our family's needs, buy a home, rent an apartment, stay in our apartment, make ends meet, and that's who this bill is for.
I want to turn, by the way, the tenants' house bill, in terms of evictions. Explain a little bit about this in terms of their rights not to be kicked out of their homes.
Yeah, so the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act is oriented on, again, trying to keep people housed. That's one of the things that we can do in the meantime as an alternative to cash-heavy, intensive programs like $300 million emergency rental assistance program. So instead of something like that, where you pay to keep people in their housing when they can't afford to be in their housing, this makes the process more fair. And makes it more like the other 49 states in the union. What we do is say that the cost of doing business should not include a subsidy by government and a staffing by government to be your collections arm. Today, we heard the Baltimore City Sheriff testify that he believes he has become the collections arm for landlords who are not willing to do the hard work of negotiating, setting up payment plans, or even just communicating with their tenants in the days after their rent may be due. Oftentimes people aren't paid on the first of the month. They're in a position where they get paid on the second, where they get paid on the fifth. And so the practice of landlords in Maryland is, because it's only $15, and because they can pass it through to their renters, that they just make it a part of doing business. So they just file for evictions immediately. So that is a stain on the record. It's a blemish on the record of renters. It makes it difficult for them to find the next apartment. And it's just an unfair use of the system. The purpose of eviction is to claw back property from someone who has not paid for it, or from someone who refuses it. It is not for purposes of trying to remind renters to pay or to catch up by the 5th or the 10th or the 15th. That is not the purpose of the eviction filing process, but it's how it's used. And 2/3 of our court's cases are landlord-tenant cases. We are overwhelming our court system, the district court system, overwhelming it with eviction filings. And we can free up their time to focus on actual evictions. We can free up their time to focus on real cases of people being victimized by their landlords, and things that don't even have to do with landlord-tenant, by reducing the number of eviction filings that are going through the court system. So that's part of it. We also include a right of first refusal in this bill, a statewide right of first refusal, which we're really excited about, because it means that if a tenant can pull together the funds and to buy the house that they're in, or if a group of tenants in triplexes or duplexes can do the same, then they can meet a market offer. They can meet an offer within a short period of time, and then as a result, will be able to stay in their property and own it. And there's no good reason, there's no financial reason or other reason for them not to be able to do so.
How often do you think that would occur? I mean, it seemed almost like a stretch to me if you're living in an apartment, or a group of people living in apartments, to scrape up the money if they're in that kind of situation.
Well, we actually have run the numbers, and across jurisdictions, it ranges from about 15% to 42% of renters would be eligible, and we believe that up to a third statewide of renters are eligible for this. I think if even a fraction of them, if there were 10% of renters at the point of sale were able to buy their houses, and that's thousands of new homeowners a year, through a pathway that isn't available today, except for in places like Baltimore City. This has been a successful program in other jurisdictions like Washington, D.C., and we think that the state of Maryland can lead on this as well.
And you also have an eviction fee as well that you're increasing. What kind of revenue do you think you're getting out of that?
Well, our estimates for revenue were in the $30 to $40 million range. I'm not sure that we will produce that kind of revenue, and I'm okay with that. But we've thought about it. If we do produce that revenue, we've split the sources of revenue between, as proposed anyway, between two funding sources. One, it would go to help fund for legal advisement during the eviction process. Tenants are at a terrible disadvantage to their landlords. They have to leave work. Oftentimes they're putting their job at risk. They're having to address child care just to get to court, and then they show up totally outgunned by a wealthy landlord with lots of resources and attorneys working for them, and it puts the tenant at disadvantage. So getting them legal services. The other is to, again, help people become housed in another way, to to provide additional funding support with the other 50% into the state housing voucher program, and to prioritize families with children as a population that we want to support into getting into housing vouchers.
So finally, where are we in terms of this legislation moving through? Some of it's gotten approved, some of it hasn't. Where are we with this at this point?
Great question. So House Bill 599, the Financing Act, and House Bill 693, the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act, have both now passed the House. So they are out of the House chamber. They are with the Senate for consideration, which will begin next week. And as of 37 minutes ago, the Environment and Transportation Committee in the House is voting, their Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee is voting on the zoning bill, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act, so House Bill 538. So I'm eager to see who voted the right way very soon. All kidding aside, I respect the committee. They've done a great job, and the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee, we expect to vote that out today, and for the Environment and Transportation Committee to vote it out tomorrow, for that to be on the House floor by Monday.
Are we seeing a party split on this, or what's happening with that?
It's a mix. We've got Republicans that are sponsors on all three bills, so it's a mix, and it's a mix across the chambers. To put it not too delicately, you'll find people opposed to housing production and density, and you could call it a sort of NIMBY streak in both parties. The Republican Party does not have a lock on that philosophy. In fact, there are many people in the Republican Party who are market oriented, want to see economic growth. I mean, the comptroller's report on the state of the Maryland economy in January told us that housing is the reason that we are lagging behind our neighboring states in economic growth. We are stagnated because we're not producing enough housing to keep our population growing, and that is the reason behind our economic stagnation. So there are Republicans that believe this is critical. There are Democrats that believe this is critical, and I think we will at least have a majority of the Democrats, if not all of them, with us on that, and I believe we will have Republicans that agree.
Do you expect some further amendments, or do you think that the bills are in pretty good shape in terms of what they're going to look like?
I think we'll see some further amendments, maybe on all three bills in the Senate. So I think we know what the House version is going to look like on HEAA, and the zoning bill, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act. I expect, like I said, I expect some amendments. So I think we'll have discussion, meaningful discussion, and there will be impassioned debate in the next week and a half. But I also expect that both chambers will ultimately pass these bills, and the governor will sign them into law.
Finally, how optimistic are you that this step that you're taking is going to solve the housing crisis, so the affordable housing crisis? Or how far do you think it's going to go, or do you think that this is something that's going to be permanent in nature?
Look, I think there are things in the world that are solvable, and I think the housing crisis is one of them. I think homelessness is one of them. We can make these things chronic. We can manage them and improve year after year. We can process improve, and the only way we get there is by changing the debate. And I think that's what we've done this year. We have changed the debate. We've changed the math on housing. There's not a governor in Maryland who has touched housing comprehensively in the history of the state. And it is happening now under Governor Moore's watch. He has done it. The human starting gun of the governor has been effective, and the debate has changed. Will these bills produce overnight the housing that we need to solve the housing crisis? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't think there's a piece of legislation that would. That's not necessarily the role of the General Assembly. I mean, sometimes they find fixes to problems that you could just flip a switch and make it all better tomorrow. That's not where we're at. So I think this is an ongoing conversation that will take years to correct, but changing the political math is step number one, and I believe we've accomplished that.
We've been speaking with Jake Day. He's the Secretary of Housing and Community Development in Maryland. Appreciate you talking with us this afternoon.
Don, thanks for this conversation. Thanks for giving space for it. I think it's important for your listeners to hear.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.